those who are saved on Judgment Day are going to be the ones who are in Christ, because God is going to remember His Son on Judgment Day and on His behalf save everyone that belongs to Him.
Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gabbert.
Who got caught in that power outage that happened through most of Bixby a week or two ago? Only a few of you, really? Okay, so I was in my home watching a movie, power goes out. Right, that happens sometimes. I check the breaker, not a breaker. So then we walk outside into the front yard. Streetlights are off. The darkest I've ever seen my neighborhood. You don't realize that there's always lights on. You don't think about the street lights normally. You're just like, yeah, this is my street at night. It's like, yeah, with giant lights, right? But I walked out there after when this power outage happened, and it was like, oh my gosh, it is dark out here. And the thing about that darkness that came on so suddenly is that not only was it a little bit startling, like when it first happened, you're like, whoa, what happened to the lights? But then beyond that, it was so dark that it was uncomfortable. You were craving the light. You wanted there to be light. We live in the light. I mean, I'm not talking about the spiritual sin. I'm talking about we're up at daytime, right? And so being in that kind of darkness, it was this weird, uncomfortable, man, we need to get the flashlights out, get a candle out, something like that. We need light. Well, have you ever slept in and had somebody open up the curtains to wake you up, later in the day? And the light comes in, what do you do immediately? Yeah, you try to cover yourself, right? You try to shrink back because why? Because the light in that moment is offensive. It's something you're not ready for, and because you're in the darkness, you're comfortable in that darkness. All of a sudden the light hits and it's uncomfortable. It's something that you shrink back from. So today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 19. And in Genesis chapter 19, we're going to look at a lot of people. And the question running through that chapter is going to be, who's living in the light and who's living in the darkness? Who in this chapter is kind of on the right or wrong side of that issue? And you can see, because some of the people who are living in the darkness, they are offended by the light. They are trying to do their actions at night for that very reason. And then some people, they are the light. They resemble the light. They look more like the light than the darkness around them. And those people, they crave the light. They're actually drawn to it. Now, we need to understand where we are in Genesis at this point, okay? Because we are in a series of narratives that are all based around Isaac being born. And that's important, because when you look at chapter 19, it is a weird detour in the middle of all chapters about Isaac. As soon as we're done with this, we're going straight back to Isaac's life. But right here, the author is just put a pause on Isaac. We're going to talk about Lot. And it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense right off the bat. The last time we saw Lot was Genesis 13. In Genesis 13, Lot looks up. He sees. He decides to go with what he can see, not by faith. He sees the land. And he says, I'll go this way, away from Abraham, because it looks so good, right? And he essentially, the language that we get in chapter 13 is not that he has totally left God's blessing, but that he's living on the fringe of God's blessing because he wants to be as close to the world as he can be. It looks so attractive to him that he's okay with having some space between him and Abraham. And Abraham, at this point, is the representative of God's blessing on earth. And so instead of being as close to Abraham as he can be, he goes to Sodom. And there's a question that you have to think through what the original audience is being told at this point. Okay? The original audience to Genesis is the Israelites wandering the wilderness. And part of what the conversation going on at this point in Genesis is the reinforcement of the idea that the Israelites are God's chosen people. Okay, but there are rival tribes that are descendants of Abraham in one way or another, right? Because you have Ishmael. Ishmael is going to give birth to several tribes. And you have to explain why it's Isaac and not Ishmael that carries on the blessing of God. Well, the same is true for Lot. Lot is a relative to Abraham, and he has descendants that become rival tribes. And the question is, what about Lot? Okay, we got Isaac, and you seem to be telling us that Isaac is somehow chosen by God special. And so, even though we have Isaac, what about Lot? What about his claim to being somebody in the Abrahamic family tree that's going to get this blessing? And so the question that the author is detouring from Isaac to answer is, what about Lot? Why not Lot? And we're going to see in this episode, in this kind of isolated story, why Lot is not God's chosen man to continue on the blessing. Now, I want you to see that chapter 19 is it's a judgment day picture. A lot of the imagery throughout the rest of the Bible about what judgment day is going to look like, it comes from this chapter, right? There's fire raining down from heaven on the wicked, and the righteous are saved from the midst, right? And so there's a lot of that imagery that we see throughout the rest of the Bible comes from this episode. There's language in this chapter that is identical to the flood story and the language used there, right? So it's another judgment by God upon wicked people. The other thing I want you to see about this chapter is the dialogue becomes less and less through the judgment portion because the author is trying to speed the narrative up. The idea is that it's getting more frantic. The closer God's judgment comes, the more excited the characters are, the more they have to hurry, the more that they are in danger, right? And the author wants you to feel that. Again, I always point these things out because we have to understand the writing style of the ancient Near East. It's not something that's readily apparent to us. We don't think like, why are they speaking less and less through the story? That doesn't even register with us. But the original audience would have felt the anticipation of judgment coming as the story got faster and faster, right? And so the story is framed by time of day indicators, right? So there are scenes that are progressing through this story, and the author is saying that these scenes are connected to the time of day, and that is going to be an indicator about who we're looking at. What time of day is this person acting in? And what are they trying to accomplish? So, look with me at Genesis chapter 19, starting in verse 1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he stood up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, Now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, No, but we shall spend the night in the public square. Yet he strongly urged them, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Okay, now we need to understand something. There is a modern interpretation of this chapter that I do not think is accurate. And as I looked into it, there's actually a much, much older view on this passage that I think is way more true. The modern indication the modern interpretation of Lot in this passage is that he is the bad guy, right? There's this comparison between Lot and Abraham, and Lot is the bad guy of this chapter. Now, the ancient church fathers, they didn't see that. They said that Lot is a righteous man in this chapter. And we're going to see why the interpretation is so popular, because there's going to be some things in this chapter that offend our sensibilities, and we're going to go, oh my goodness, Lot is horrible. But we have to actually understand what's happening, okay? So the first thing I want you to see is part of the accusation is, in the chapter before, three people appear to Abraham, and he recognizes one of them as the Lord. And the accusation starts here because two people approach Lot, and he doesn't recognize that he's speaking to the Lord. That's the claim. Well, clearly, Lot's no Abraham because he doesn't know he's speaking to the Lord. Okay, but hold on. If you look at what happens at the end of chapter 18, the two men continue on, and it says Abraham stood before the Lord. So the Lord stayed behind, talked to Abraham, and then, went about his business, right? He's not it's not that he's not present right now in Sodom, but it's the two figures, the assistants, or what we're going to see are angels that approach Lot. And so I don't think Lot recognizes he's talking to the Lord because he's not talking to the Lord, right? So right off the bat, Lot is reacting to what's in front of him. He's reacting to these two, what appear to be men to him. Okay? There is a comparison. There is a comparison in this passage between Abraham and Lot. The language is there's just a laundry list of identical statements through this chapter. But there's a purpose behind that comparison. It's to answer the question, what about Lot? What about Lot? Why is he not continuing God's blessings like Isaac gets to? Okay, the second thing I want you to see here is the first redeeming thing that happens to Lot. Lot is sitting at the city gates in the evening, and these two men approach, and he says, hey, you should come stay in my house. Now, here's the thing. It was common practice to move into a city square and either spend the night in the square or be asked to go to somebody's house while you were in the square in the evening to be hosted. Hospitality was a huge thing in the ancient Near East. That was very common. It was also known that cities were more safe than countryside. So Lot is insisting that they accompany him to the countryside instead of staying in the safe city, right? And he is persistent about this. He basically is almost aggressive. He's like, you need to come stay with me, right? Now, here's the thing. I think it's because Lot knows what Sodom is like at night. I think Lot is aware of what happens to people who show up in the city in the late time of the day. And so he basically stops them and says, just come stay with me. Just do it. You'll be safer if you come stay with me, even though it's counter to the normal wisdom of the moment. So Lot is already not the bad guy in this moment. Look at verse 4. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, and they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now look, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with any man. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do not do anything to these men because they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, get out of the way. They also said, this one came in as a foreigner and already he is acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. But they pressed hard against Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness from the small to the great, so that they became weary of trying to find the doorway. Okay. So the first thing I want you to see here is the generational sin. The language used here is not just that every demographic of society comes, right? It says from every quarter. Every part of the city is taking place in this sin. It's that accepted. It's that normal. But on top of that, it says from young to old. This is a pervasive generational sin that's being passed down almost from father to son, right? The idea is there are not righteous people in the city of Sodom. There is no one here that is advocating for something else. This is the norm. Now, they conduct their business at night because sin loves the darkness. But there's no one besides Lot to tell them not to do this thing. All right? Now, the other thing I want you to see here is we got to look at what Lot is actually saying. All right? Because the part that gets us all out of whack is we're like, did he just offer them his daughters? Immediately you're like, yeah, of course he's the bad guy. Totally, right? But we need to examine what Lot is actually saying. Okay? First of all, let's understand what kind of society we're in. For a man, you had a wife and you had daughters, and they were a financial responsibility for you. They were a financial burden to you. If one of your daughters was raped, she was no longer able to be married off. She was now a permanent financial burden on her father forever because she was disgraced, right? This is a huge problem. Okay, now you have to understand what Lot is saying to them. The first thing Lot says is he says, these men have come under the protection of your neighbor. They don't commit this. He's saying, don't commit this wicked and perverse act against these men who are supposed to be under my protection, in my hospitality, it would be better for you to commit a sin against your neighbor, a property crime essentially, against your neighbor. It would be better to do that because it would at least be a natural form of sexual relations, as opposed to committing this wicked and perverse act against these strangers. Okay, understand what he just said to them. He is shaming them. He's not saying, oh, have my daughters, no worry about it. Like, I can have more. That's not the point. What he's saying is, think about how bad it would be for you to commit a property crime against me, your neighbor. That would still be better than what you're about to do, right? Now, he's doing it in actually a really tactful way. He's shaming them by making an offer that they know is inappropriate, right? Now, understand, how else do we see this? Look at their reaction. The start of their reaction is to say, you're not our real neighbor. They say, you're a foreigner. Right? You're not actually somebody that we should care about. Now, again, we talk about themes all the time. What is the theme running through Genesis already? Love your neighbor. And they are told as early in the book of Genesis, you're the blessing for all people. You're supposed to be the people showing everybody else how to act. They already know what being a neighbor is. Right? Now, somehow each generation gets it wrong over and over again, but the book has already told them what it means to be a neighbor. And in this moment, the men of Sodom are being shown to be even more evil because they're saying, well, you're a foreigner, so we don't have to treat you like our neighbor, which they already know is wrong. And then on top of that, they admit that they're ashamed because they say, he's trying to judge us, right? Does our generation do that? All the time. You're trying to judge us. You're trying to make us feel bad. Who are you to tell us? And here's the thing, the tacit admission in this passage to the audience is, Lot's judgment's the same as God's judgment in this situation. Lot has the same opinion of the sin they're about to commit that God has. And so they are not just rejecting Lot, but they are rejecting God. They're saying, we won't be judged by you or anybody else. This is what we're going to do. So they attack Lot, and the angels reach out, they pull Lot back in the house, and they strike them in with blindness. There's some debate over the language here. Some people think it can actually literally mean a blinding light. It's only used in a couple places, this word for blindness, but it's definitely an act of God. It actually shows us that the angels are divine in some way because they are, every time we see people committing acts of God that are human, they have to go to God first and petition God to act in a certain way. And these angels, they are so much the representative of God in this moment, they just kind of reach out and accomplish what God wants to happen, right? So they pull Lot back in, they cause this blindness. And I want you to see the blindness of the world. It says that they are weary to find the door. They eventually give up, right? I want you to see that Jesus calls himself the door. He says, I am the way. I am the door. No one comes to the Father except through me, right? And the world wants to go through the door and get to the Father, but on their own, of their own merit, and they are blind to the point of becoming weary with looking. They can't find the door, and they eventually give up. But again, what do we see so far? We're in night. That's the scene we're in. Bad things are happening. And who looks like the light right now? Lot does. Lot's not the bad guy. Lot is sitting here saying, don't do these wicked and shameful things to the generation he's in, to the world he's in. Right? Let's move on. Look at verse 12. Then the two men said to Lot, whom else do you have here? A son-in-law? And your sons and daughters, and whomever you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, and said, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is destroying the city. But he appeared to his sons-in-law to be joking. Okay, so the first thing I want you to see here is the second chance for Sodom. Why do we have this little dialogue with the sons-in-law? First of all, I want you to see how intertwined Lot's life is with Sodom. His daughters are engaged to Sodomites, right? So he has ingrained his life into the society around him. But why we have this dialogue in here is because you could claim, well, there was this evil, but God never really gave them a chance to repent, except that the sons-in-law in this moment represent the entire population because Lot virtually repeats the warning from God to the Sodomites, and his sons-in-law, what do? They laugh at him. They laugh in his face. They're laughing at God and God's judgment. They don't take it seriously. They don't think it matters or it's coming. They don't believe in it. And I told you laughter was going to be a theme in the Isaac portion of the story. As we see Isaac's life, there's going to be laughter from different people at different times. Who's laughing in this passage? The men of Sodom. They're laughing, and they're laughing at God. This is, again, a comparison of Lot and Sodom. We're still at night, and yet Lot is believing and acting on what God has told him. He's actually, at this point, the mouthpiece for God. He is the testimony to the people of Sodom. You got to get out of here. Bad things are coming. He is God's chosen representative in this moment. See, we reflect the light of Jesus Christ in our life. We reflect that light, and we reflect it by living in it, by living like it, right? And here's the thing about that. When we live according to the light of Christ, it's offensive. It's offensive by definition. I don't know if you saw the NFL kicker that got in trouble this week for the commencement speech he gave. I've been listening to a lot of commentary on that, and one of the things I heard about, there was some movie that recently came out about a Catholic priest who he kind of leaves the church and he lives his whole life. At the end of the movie, he dies holding a crucifix, and the message of the movie is he had quiet faith and he still believed in spite of everything. And a prominent Catholic priest did a review of that movie, and he said, this is exactly what the world wants. The world wants us to believe in silence. Not tell anybody, not act it out, not get in their way, not be offensive by living according to what God says is true. And in this moment, Lot is the person who's living in an offensive way. Now, he is weak. He's ingrained in this culture around him, but he still looks more like the light than he does like the Sodomites. We see the sin at night. We see the darkness of the whole world, and now we're going to see the sunrise. Now, if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings, there is a battle scene at a place called Helm's Deep. It's like my favorite part in the movies because it's just a long, long action scene. It's really cool. So before that action scene, Gandalf, the wizard, he says, when the sun rises on the third day, look to the east, right? And so they have this night battle, and it is like the longest. I mean, they did a good job in the movie. You feel the length of this night in this fight scene, and it's just darkness, and they're just being closed in on, and things are getting worse and worse and worse. And then, right as the sun rises, redemption is seen on the hilltop because their reinforcements have come, and they charge in the battle with the light behind them, and they defeat the darkness that's been closing in all night long. I want you to see something here. That theme is biblical. This idea that the sunrise is the salvation from a long, dark night. Look at verse 15. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. So the men grasped his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his 2 daughters, because the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stay anywhere in the surrounding area. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your compassion, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee, and it is small. Please let me escape there. Is it not small? So that my life may be saved." And they said to him, "Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you have arrived there." Therefore the town was named Zoar. So we see the sunrise after this long, dark night, this night that has been closing in around Lot. The sun finally comes up, and then in the light of day, we get to finally see the true weakness of Lot. See, when it was at night, Lot looked like the light. But as the sun comes up, we see how ingrained into the world Lot is, where his real weakness and fear is controlling him. See, this is the best place to compare Lot to Abraham. Where's Abraham? Far, far away from Sodom. Lot is so ingrained in Sodom that right as the sun rises, he hesitates. He stops following God the way that he's supposed to. He is weak. I want you to see that Lot has no merit, right? They say, escape to the mountains. And he is literally too weak to even do the very minimum thing that they've said to save his life. He says, I can't do it. I can't get to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me. How about instead this small town that's over here? How about that? Right? And I want you to see this, not by his merit, but because of God's compassion. Not only does God condescend to Lot's weakness in this moment, right? And I've always told you guys, God condescends to weakness, not rebellion. So not only does God condescend to Lot's weakness, but because of Lot's weakness, the whole town is saved. God's salvation is sweeps over the town that Lot goes to because God has compassion on Lot. Now, what we don't really know so far, what the story doesn't necessarily tell us yet, why? Why is God so determined to save Lot? Lot is so weak, he has to be taken by the hand and led out to the start and said, go that way. Get out of here. Right? He's that weak, and yet God is so determined to save him. Are you so close to the world you barely look different than them? Right? When we see Lot compared to Abraham, he does start to look a little bit more like the Sodomites. All of a sudden, in that comparison, he starts to look worse. It's only in the darkness that he looked reasonably good at all. So the question is, how do you look? Like, do you only look like a Christian when you're at work and it's because you're not doing the worst things imaginable like your coworkers? Or do you also look like a believer when you're in the light, when you're walking in fellowship with your community and your body? Do you look like the world around you? Salvation comes at the same time as judgment. See, in the same day that judgment and wrath appear, salvation will also be there. I did this training event in the military. One of the things that happens very early in the military is that they train you to keep all your equipment with you. It's important. Don't lose anything. I mean, I used to tie my pocket knife to my belt loop so that I didn't lose my pocket knife, right? You can't lose anything. It's very important, and it's ingrained into you. Well, then we did this training event where you have to jump into water wearing some of your equipment, and you start to sink, and you have to ditch the equipment to swim back up. Now, when you first jump in and you look up, you can see where the light is, where the water ends, but you're being dragged down by something. And it goes against the very nature of all the training to ditch the thing that's dragging you down. It's practically a part of you at this point, and you have to strip that off so that you can float back up, swim back up, and get to air and get to freedom. But you can see the light. You just have to fight the very thing that has been ingrained in you, become a part of you, that's dragging you down. I want you to see God's judgment coming in the daylight, in the truth that it brings, the salvation that it brings with it. Look at verse 23. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the surrounding area and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife from behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Notice that all of the sin in this passage has occurred at night, but God judges in the day. God is not afraid of people seeing his judgments because they're righteous and they're just. They're true. So God waits until the whole world can see his judgments so that he can testify to the truth of his justice, to the truth of his righteousness. He judges in the daylight. The sun is high in the sky so that everybody can see what's happening. I also want you to see that this is my favorite comparison of any comparison in the entire chapter. Okay? We've had the Sodomites who are wicked and perverse and rebelling against God and rejecting God and laughing at God over here. And then we have Abraham somewhere, is not necessarily in the picture of this particular story just yet, but we know Abraham somewhere all over here, all the way away from Sodom. Not even close to the scene, because he is so close with God, right? And then we've had Lot in the middle, and there's been kind of this like debate of like, where does Lot fall? Is he more on Abraham's side, or does he more look like the Sodomites, right? And it finally becomes clear when we see Lot's wife. Why? Because she too has her hand held and is led all the way to salvation and told, just go that way. But don't linger, don't tarry. And what happens? Her heart is so tied into the world, it's so tied into the life she has, she is so fearful of losing everything she has, that instead of following the direction of God and finding salvation, she lingers, she looks back at the world, and she's swept away in the judgment. This moment draws the line. See, because now all of a sudden we realize Lot is firmly on Abraham's side, because when he is finally led by the hand because of God's mercy and compassion and told, go that way and don't look back, what does he do? He obeys. He follows the Lord. He escapes because he believes God that judgment is coming. And his wife, she turns around because her heart is truly in the world and not in God, and she's swept away in the judgment. Look at verse 27. Now Abraham got up early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the surrounding area. And behold, he saw the smoke of the land ascended like the smoke of the furnace. So it came about when God destroyed the cities of the surrounding area that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. I want you to see this. This is the climax of the story. The build up to this point. The question is, why is God so determined to save Lot? And the answer is, because God remembers Abraham. This is a huge moment. See, in every generation in the Old Testament, the people are given a type of Christ, somebody who's supposed to point to Jesus eventually, right? And each one of them falls a little bit short, but as we see them, they teach us different things about Jesus. They teach us who he was going to be, what was ultimately only going to be seen perfectly in Jesus. We see broken and in glimpses throughout the Old Testament. And in this moment, here's what we see. Lot is not saved because of his merit. He is saved because he belongs to God's righteous one, to the one who God remembers on Judgment Day. I want you to think about this. Those who are saved on Judgment Day are going to be the ones who are in Christ, because God is going to remember his Son on Judgment Day and on his behalf save everyone that belongs to him. This is the gospel message right here. Lot's not strong enough. Lot looks terrible in this passage, especially when compared to Abraham, and yet it is because of Abraham that Lot is saved. My question for you is it your own merit you're writing? Listen, that's a trap. Understand that's a trap, because either you think you can accomplish it, in which case you're set up for just blind failure, or you realize you can't accomplish it and you're just going to be in depression and despair. Neither end works. The reality is you have to remember Christ. You have to look to Christ. You have to look to the same light and live in that same light that God is going to remember on Judgment Day. And when you are remembered because you are in Christ, you'll be delivered from the darkness. You'll be remembered by God. It's not your merit. It is Christ and Christ's work alone that saves you. I want you to see this after everything they've seen, after God's saving grace, after God has led them by the hand, I want you to see that Lot's daughters choose darkness. They choose to continue to not believe in God, not act in God's light, but they then choose to act at night. Think about the question again. Think about the question we're trying to answer. What about Lot? The question is, what about Lot? Why does Isaac get to be the chosen one? And this is where we really get to that answer. Look at verse 30. Now Lot went up from Zoar with his 2 daughters and stayed in the mountains because he was afraid to stay in Zoar. And he stayed in the cave, he and his 2 daughters. Then the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to have relations with us according to the custom of all the earth. Come, let's make our father drink wine, and let's sleep with him, so that we may keep our family alive through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and slept with her father. And he did not know when she lay down or got up. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, Look, I slept last night with my father. Let's make him drink wine tonight too. Then you go in and sleep with him, so that we may keep our family alive through our father. So they had their father drink wine that night too, and the younger got up and slept with him, and he did not know when she lay down or got up. And so both of the daughters of Lot conceived by their father. The firstborn gave birth to the son and named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. As for the younger, she also gave birth to a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the sons of Ammon to this day. Moab means from my father, and Ben-Ami means the son of my kinsman. Right? The names actually reflect the act by which they came about. There's 2 plausible reasons that the daughters commit this act that are suggested. One is that they just think they saw like the end of the world, and they literally think that there's no other men left, and this is the only way to for survival to occur, right? Because even the reason they went to the mountains after they went to Zoar is because Lot thinks judgment's coming here too. It's only a matter of time, right? So they've abandoned everything. They're living in the mountains, and the girls could easily have thought the propagation of humanity rests on us right now, right? That's one reason. The other reason is that Lot is old and about to die, and they're going to be poor and destitute forever. They are out of luck because they're not married. Their fiancés just burned to a crisp, and so they have no options, right? And so but what do? Instead of trusting in the Lord, instead of acting in the light, they take matters into their own hands, and they do something despicable. They do something terrible. They take matters in their own hands. And notice the contrast. Over here we've got people committing incest to take matters in their own hands. And over here we've got the miraculous birth of Isaac. Totally in God's hands. Happens in a way that reflects what will eventually be the virgin birth, because it couldn't have happened without God, right? Totally delivered by God versus, again, what people are always trying to do, which is deliver themselves and come up with their own plan and be their own salvation. And this part massively discredits the Moabites and the Ammonites. The look towards them is, that's where you came from. You're a product of that. You don't know why not Lot? That's why not Lot, right? Isaac, God's chosen plan, came about miraculously. You, product of that, right? This is the slur that's happening against these rival tribes in this moment, right? And so that the Israelites are bolstering their claim that they are God's chosen people. And yet, in the midst of all of the salvation, in the midst of all of the redemption of God's divine providence over Lot and his family, his daughters choose darkness. His daughters act at night. See, where do we see Abraham? Abraham rose in the morning in the salvation of the sunrise, and he stood before the Lord, and he witnessed God's justice. See, that is the best figure in the entire passage. That's the guy we're supposed to emulate. That's the guy pointing forward to the Christ. And yet, just like the Sodomites acted at night, Lot's daughters act at night. Sin loves the darkness. We exist in the long darkness of this life. But we have glimpses in this life, and when we read God's Word, we have glimpses of the light that is Christ. And someday, the sun will rise, and God's salvation will come, and it will also bring with it judgment. Here's the question. Will the light that rises when God returns, will it catch you off guard? Will it blind you and be offensive to you? Or will it be just the next day because you've been living in that light? You've been training your eyes on it. It is the rescue from the darkness. Because it will either be the rescue from the darkness, something you've been craving, something you've only had the candlelight version of, or it will be terror. It will be an offensiveness to you because it will bring with it the fire and the brimstone of judgment. It won't be a relief at all. I want that day to be a relief. I want to live so much in the light that when it finally is here, I say, I'm so glad the sun finally came up. I'm so glad we're not in the dark night anymore. What I don't want is for the sun to creep over that horizon and I have to go, oh no, he's here, and it's not going to go well for me. Think about this week, whether you are living as light in the dark world, or whether your life is ingrained, is tied into the world, if it is a part of our culture that loves wickedness and depravity.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor of young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.